So we've had some questions that have been written in. We don't have anyone on right now. So you'll see this probably in its recorded version. And if I say something today that you have a question about or you want me to elaborate on, then I would encourage you to reach out to me and I would be more than happy to come and review that with you or answer whatever question that you've got there. The first question that we had was from an individual who evidently has multiple trips planned that are back to back to back. So it's not just one big trip. They have one big trip. They come home for what sounds like a couple of days, go on another big trip. They come home and are home for a couple of days and go on another big trip. And this spans over the course of 4 to 6 weeks. So you've got a lot of output. You've obviously got a lot of training going into something like that. Their question was, what are the tips that I should follow in trying to stay strong between those trips? In other words, I'm home for a few days. What should I focus on in preparation for the turnaround time on the next trip? And I really tried to condense these down into 4 things that you could follow. It's really easy in nutrition to think about, okay, well, what are the 4 main things that this person could focus on? And you get sidetracked on this random thing and this random thing and this random thing. And together, all of these random things contribute a little bit, but in and of themselves really don't make that much of a difference. And so a major objective of mine is, all right, how could we find maybe the top 2, the top 1, the top 3 different things that a person could focus on, and they're going to see a big return on their investment for the time that they put in and focusing on these nutrition things. And here's what they were for this specific answer that may be applicable to you. Number 1, you're going to want to focus on calories when you're home. We think of calories, and almost always, for a lot of us, the first thing that comes to mind is something negative, unfortunately, and that is that, oh, calories contribute towards weight gain. We almost see them in a negative light, and they're not always. In fact, it takes calories to repair the muscle that gets damaged on some of these big pushes, whether it's on a big event or whether it's on a training hike. Your body takes calories in the form of carbohydrates, proteins, and dietary fats to repair itself. So when you're home and it seems like, well, I'm not training, I'm actually not doing anything, I'm letting my body recover, and I'm not out in the mountains doing these big pushes, it seems like I shouldn't eat as much, right? That's wrong. Your body takes calories to recover and repair between these big trips. So it's important that you take the time and plan to eat, even though it seems like your output isn't as high as it may normally be. So the number 1 thing is calories. Now, as a part of calories, you're going to want to make sure that you're not excluding any nutrient group. You're not going to want to exclude carbohydrates or exclude proteins or exclude dietary fats. You need all 3 of them because, as we've talked about multiple times in our sessions in here, as well as in the course that we've developed, as well as in the podcast Rowan and I have done together, each of those nutrients, carbohydrates, proteins, and fats, have a distinct role in nutrition and in recovery and in preparation and in fueling. So you can't have carbohydrates doing the job of protein. You can't have protein doing the job of carbohydrates. That's why it's important that you get each of those individually into the level or the degree to which you personally need it. So don't exclude any nutrient. Number 2, you're going to want to make sure that you get in plenty of fluid. So whenever you're in the mountains, you're typically not getting in as much fluid as you want to, whether that's because you're nauseous or whether because it's access or whether it's because you just don't feel like stopping, whatever. So when you come back from a big trip, you're really not optimally hydrated usually. You're sweating a lot, you're losing a lot through urine, so on and so forth. So when you're home and you have the opportunity and you have the convenience of a faucet, you want to make sure that you're staying hydrated. Second reason that's important is because you got to remember that hydration helps flush your system of the waste products that accumulate from activity and exercise. So make sure that you are getting plenty of hydration to help flush that waste out of the system so that your body can recover. Number 3, especially if it's hot, you're going to want to have some sodium when you're home. You lose a lot of sodium in salt. Salt is the number 1 electrolyte most associated with sweat loss. We often think, oh, well, if I'm cramping, it's because I need more potassium. Give me a banana or give me some potatoes, because potatoes are high in potassium. And potassium is an electrolyte that matters with cramping and it matters with nerves firing and it matters with muscles firing. However, the number one electrolyte that's most commonly associated with sweat loss is salt. So you want to be sure that as you get ready to go on this next big trip, you're replacing any losses so that you can operate optimally, right? That's a very, excuse, excuse me, that's a very key part of good nutrition that you cannot neglect is you want to make sure that you're getting plenty of sodium in as well. Number four, maybe most important, is you want to rest. If your muscles are tired and they're worn out, you're going to want to rest them, not just for the sake of allowing the muscle to rest and to prevent overuse, but more importantly, the opportunity when you rest, the opportunity for those muscles to then fill back up with nutrition, to fill back up with water, and to recover optimally, ultimately is going to set the stage for how well you perform in the subsequent trips. Now, if you've got like this person 3 or 4 back to back to back to back to back trips, then that's going to be important. Number one, the first trip is going to be important to recover from if you have any hope of performing optimally on the fourth trip, right? And so you're going to want to implement all four of these each time that you get back home from the trip in an effort to stay strong through the duration of the season or whatever it is that you've got focused on. Now, we've covered these four actually in a post years ago. And if you go on our social media page and you search for that post or you scroll until you find that post, then you'll find where we elaborate on each of these much more in depth. If you want to go back and reflect on them, obviously we covered them in here, but if you want to learn more about them, then of course you can go back in that post, scroll through the different slides, and it will give you some goals and some targets that you can aim for as far as how many grams of this do I need, or how many grams of that do I need, or what kind of focus should I put on this or that. The next question, what are your thoughts on getting a majority of protein from bars, powders, chips, and things that are similar to that? So the core of the question is this. We often think about our protein coming from things like eggs or chicken or tofu or what have you. That seems obvious. But for a lot of people, especially when we're busy, they're eating things like that have become popular over the last couple of years, like protein chips and protein cookies and protein bars, which have been around and maybe the most popular form of protein supplement, to whey protein shakes, to all of these other, let's call them untraditional forms of protein in the sense of they're not meat, or you're not having to cook them, or you're not having to prepare them. And so the question is what are your thoughts on getting a majority of my protein from those things? And my thoughts are, I guess, they're complicated in the sense of it's not as easy as to say it's good or bad. It's to say this. Can it work? Yes, it can work. Protein is protein for the most part. We've actually got another question about protein quality that we'll cover here in a little bit. But if you're getting some source of protein in, then the body is essentially going to view that as contributory towards your overall protein needs. Now, that must mean that I think they're good, right? No, not really. They're not. I'm not entirely in the camp of them being good, and here's why. The type of protein that generally goes in those products is a protein that's digested very quick. And that means a couple of things. Number one, it's going to be processed very quickly. And oftentimes we're recommending high protein diets so that people feel fuller longer. They're not over consuming calories, leading to a weight that they don't want to be at whenever they're in the mountains. So we want that protein to hold them over longer. When you're eating your protein from things like bars and cookies or candy or what have you, or protein muffins, protein chips, etc., the type of protein that's in those products isn't going to sit with you nearly as long as something that you've cooked, or even something that you've not cooked but is still a whole protein like jerky, for example, right? So there's that piece of it that you've got to factor in. The second piece, and I guess it goes along with this, is there is, and more times than not, the calories that are coming from that bar, chip, muffin, cookie, whatever, have more calories coming from carbs and fats than they do protein. So you're getting a lot of calories with very little bang or return on your investment for actual protein. So I guess in my mind, it'll work if you find yourself in a pinch from time to time. Is it okay to rely on them? It is. Is that a place that I would want to be regularly getting my protein from in an effort to try to achieve either performance or weight-based or perhaps both goals? Not really for those reasons. So I would view protein products like that as this. An occasional use, okay. And all the time use, I probably would try to find a different alternative that's equal convenience. For example, jerky or something similar like that's going to be high in protein. You just buy it off the shelf, or even if you make your own, it's pretty convenient. Cans of or packages of already pre-made tuna and or chicken and or whatever form it is comes in now. It used to be that you would just have to pop open a can of tuna and suffer through it, but now it's like, there's so many different flavors, and you just basically tear off the pouch and you can get easy 11 to sometimes they range as high as 20 grams of protein just eating like a sriracha flavored tuna right out of the pouch, which tastes fairly decent, right? So I would rely on things like that. There's already prepackaged hard-boiled eggs that you can buy. You could buy a rotisserie chicken for $5 or $6 at the grocery, and that could potentially be, 4 or 5 different lunches, dinners, snacks, or however it is that you want to break them up. So you don't necessarily need to spend. I mean, most of these protein products are pretty expensive too. You're paying $2 to $3 for one bar, or one muffin, or one prepackaged product. You could get a rotisserie chicken for $6 and have, 3 times the servings, 3 to 4, 5 times the servings that you're getting out of those bars when you're talking about $1 per dollar return on your investment. So they can work, but definitely not like the number one way that I would say that I would recommend getting my protein sources from. Next question, and this actually parallels that previous question, is does protein quality matter? And they go on to elaborate. Is the protein that's found in something like rice or oats or tofu or beans or peanuts or peanut butter, is the quality of that protein, so we're not even talking about bars at this point, but is the quality of that protein on the same playing field as the protein that's found in meat or fish or eggs or some of these other products, or animal-based products, basically? Answer to that is both yes and no, or it depends, right? It's yes in the sense of it contributes towards your total daily intake for protein. It's not to say that it doesn't matter. There are plenty of athletes and everyday folks like me who eat no animal-based proteins and are still able to get their protein needs and excel in performance. Now, I do eat meat. I am not a non-animal based person, but I'm saying I'm an everyday person, and I still count the contribution of protein from oats and bread and all these other non-animal based proteins towards my total daily energy intake and daily protein intake. However, with that said, we do know that there are certain scores that we rank proteins by. Those proteins are ranked by 2 different scores. Number 1 is how digestible is the protein? In other words, of all the protein that a product says it has in it, how much are you actually getting versus how much is the body discarding because of how digestible it is, which is the second score. So it's how digestible is it? And the second score is, of the protein that's in here, how much of it, in a percent or a certain score, how much of that is contributory towards building my muscle? So we can rank them. Some of them have more building blocks than others. Some of them have less. So we rank proteins based on these 2 scores. Now, without getting too in the weeds about what has the highest score and what has the lowest score and what's better and what's not, I think the general rule of thumb is this, that we've always taken away from that. Any protein that is animal-based product, whether it's, something you would think of like a chicken breast or a piece of steak or a hamburger to an egg to even dairy-based products like Greek yogurt, for example. Any of those products will always have higher scores in both of those categories than any non-animal based product. That does not mean, though, that non-animal based proteins don't matter and you shouldn't eat them and they're not as great or whatever. It just generally means that you're going to need more of them and you're going to have to pay closer attention to the fact of whether or not they are meeting the number of protein grams in a day that you need to specifically try to build muscle and recover from training. So all of it contributes, but yes, we do give higher scores and higher rankings to the proteins that are predominantly found in animal-based products as opposed to any product that has protein but is non-animal based like all the other ones that we had talked about. The second piece is this, and this also goes back to what we had said about the bars and the muffins and those type of proteins, is this. If you think about where a lot of people say they get their protein from in a non-animal based fashion, they're usually saying nuts and beans. And those products are not high in protein, right? So you think about peanut butter, people will say, well, I eat, some peanut butter to get it a shot of protein. Peanut butter is predominantly high in fat and it happens to have a little bit of protein, right? So you've got peanut butter that's got, let's call it 200 calories in a serving. Of those 200 calories, almost 150 of those 200 are from fat. So you've got 75% of the calories in peanut butter coming from fat, not from protein, right? So you have to keep that in mind. And that's particularly true if you're trying to lose body fat, if you're trying to maintain a certain weight or body fat before you get ready to go on a big trip, or even if it's just for daily life. If you're trying to get 30 grams of protein in at a meal, which is kind of a good mark for a lot of us to aim for. If you're trying to get 30 grams in, to get that much protein in from peanut butter, you would have to consume 1,000 calories worth of peanut butter to get 30 grams of protein. Compare that to 160 calories to get 30 grams of protein in if you were going to be eating a piece of chicken breast, for example. So it's got, substantially less calories to hit your actual protein target. And that's important to remember and it's important to consider dependent upon what your goals are. And right, that's with training, that's with performance, that's with weight, that's with all of those things. So you're constantly trying to balance and juggle those things whenever you're talking about is something good or bad. Well, it's always relative to what are you using it for, because there is nothing that's just inherently good or bad. Next question. What are the 3 most important vitamins to use during peak backpacking season? This could be backpack hunting. This could be backpacking. This could be peak bagging. This could be really what they're saying is this could be any time that I'm out in the mountains where it seems like prime weather for me to be hiking a lot and doing a lot of these things outdoors. In other words, my activity expenditure during that time is really, really high. What are some key vitamins that I should pay attention to in order to keep functioning really well during and throughout the course of that season? I thought about this, and the words vitamins is a little bit misleading because that would mean like vitamin A or vitamin C or vitamin whatever. And none of those really came to mind. So I changed it a little bit. And this kind of goes back to the first question we had, and that is this. I would have a multivitamin. And a multivitamin is basically one vitamin, whether it's a chewable or liquid or whatever, that has all of our vitamins wrapped up into one. What's important to know about a multivitamin is there are certain vitamins that are responsible for converting our food into usable fuel. We eat, but we never think about the fact that that food that we've eaten at some point becomes fuel to let us go do the things that we love. And what helps that whole cycle happen is fueled by vitamins. So they do matter. And taking a multivitamin, because obviously you're limited on the amount of fresh fruit and vegetables that you can have whenever you're backpacking, is a key way to make sure that you're still getting enough of those things, right? So the second piece of that is this. Adequate calorie intake. Goes back to the first part. Adequate fuel is going to help your body to recover. There's no way around it. There's no other way to get it. If you're trying to recover during a peak season where your output's really high, training volumes are really high, etc., got to have adequate calorie and protein intake. You cannot just have adequate protein intake without adequate calorie intake and expect yourself to recover. The body has got to sense that it's got enough fuel to burn so that it can use the protein to recover by. If you're just eating a lot of protein, but you're really low on calories, you will never fail to see the performance that you could potentially have, as well as the recovery that you could potentially have from merging both of those. Adequate calories and adequate protein have to go hand in hand if you want to see opportune and optimal recovery and training volumes to be hit. And the third one would be this: caffeine. If you're low on sleep because you're going all the time trying to take advantage of weather, trying to take advantage of sunlight, trying to take advantage of all of these things that have to be in place in order to go on some of these trips and make these big pushes to peaks, or to make it, to take advantage of a specific season, like might be for the hunting piece of that question, then you may not be getting a lot of sleep, and caffeine can most certainly still help you be alert and aware while on the mountain if sleep is low. Now, you're not going to want to operate always from a place of little sleep, because that causes its own set of complications. But if it's temporary and you're really trying to take advantage of the weather windows that you've got, and you're really trying to take advantage of the opportunity, it can certainly help. So, hope that this helped answer the questions that you guys have had. Appreciate you writing in whenever you have written in to ask those. Again, if there's been some that we've not covered, I would encourage you to write those to me directly, or happy to answer them. You can send them to me directly at info@v2pnutrition.com. You can check out the podcasts that Rowan and I have done. We've covered some of this, as well as the bi-weekly podcast that we've got on Valley to Peak as well, if you're interested in learning more about nutrition. And Rowan has been on there as a guest too. So every other week, right here, Mondays, 3 p.m. Mountain Time in the U.S., and you can use one of the time converters online to check out your local time. If you'd ever like to join, we would love to have you. But if not, you're always encouraged to write questions. Hope you enjoyed this. Hope it was helpful. We'll talk to you again soon.